following discussion with Alan Saw on the historical development of Gate of Life or Mingmen theory took place as an extra recording to the Purple Cloud podcast number 19, intended to clarify the concepts discussed in the podcast. It was never edited into the podcast as originally intended, so is presented here as a standalone video. The full podcast can be listened to on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or on our website www.purplecloudinstitute.com.
Yeah, I think Mingmen in general is just like it's an exciting topic. For us now, and as much as it did to the time period for people like Zhang Jingyue, it was because he was not the only person who wrote something about Mingmen. Also, Zhao Xianke also wrote something about it. But I think Zhang Jingyue actually would be the prominent person to present or leave behind us all this valuable information that kind of forever shaped how the Chinese medicine developed ever since his time. So, but
maybe you could talk a little bit about the history of the development of Mingmen, and then around this time there seems to be a bit of an explosion of thought and we'd say innovation around the concepts of Mingmen. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, definitely. That's definitely a very important starting angle of how we should go into Mingmen, because from the very early onset of Chinese medical writing, we don't have much that talks about Mingmen. I think Nanjing question 36 has like one line of it. That's it. It says there are two kidneys. One is the kidney, the other one is the Mingmen, and essence and spirit and essence are attached to it. And that's it. Nothing explained. And so we don't have much talk about the Mingmen for the next almost 1,000 years or so. But during the time of Song Dynasty, or Song Jinyuan Dynasty, that's about the 11th century to the 13th century, people start to talk about Mingmen. And actually, at the time, they were mostly focused on the ministerial fire. And so actually, one of the foundation we definitely need to look into to establish our historical context is the writing of Zhu Danji. So Zhu Danji has this work called 格致舆论 in English. There's a translation available by Yang Shouzong. It's called Extra Treatises Based on Investigation and Inquiry. So in that book, there's one influential essay. It's called The Treatise on the Ministerial Fire. So in that one, he talks about a philosophical aspect, metaphysical aspect of yin, yang, and also the sovereign fire and ministerial fire, and in which he really go deep into what is the role of ministerial fire in terms of the person's health, in terms of the person's pathology, and how a stir of emotion could lead to pathogenic ministerial fire, and then that would lead to illness and death. So ever since this treatise came out, I think it was an unfortunate result from the time period, because at the time when this writing was produced, he was fighting against something else. He was fighting against the Bureau formula at the time, which was a little bit too dry and too hot. So he was really advocating for cooling approach. So his followers likewise followed suit. So they would focus a lot more on the pathogenic aspect of the ministerial fire. So by the time when it got to Zhang Jingyue's time, most people were using a lot of bitter and cooling herbs like zhimu, huangbai, huanglian, shigao, things like that to quench the ministerial fire, which they perceive to be the root of disease. And so in a way, when Zhang Jingyue, when he talks about the Mingmen, it is actually a response to this ministerial fire. So in a way, we can think of the Mingmen or the life gate as like a healthy, vital aspect of the ministerial fire. So it is a response. You can say it's a rebuttal or from my point of view, it's almost like he was asking people to revisit what Zhu Danxi was writing in his work. Because Zhu Danxi, he actually, in that essay, he actually talks about the healthy aspect of the ministerial fire or the Mingmen. If you do not have ministerial fire, you cannot have life. And so basically, Zhang Jingyue was latched onto that idea, said, okay, now everyone already know all there is about pathology about the ministerial fire or the Mingmen. Now let's talk about what health benefit we can get from it, and how can we not have this dogma that anything has to do with fire. So I imagine during Zhang Jingyue's time, because a lot of people were treated by those bitter herbs, so he would definitely have to save a lot of people from yang collapse and everything. So you will see in his formula, he uses a lot of yang tonics, such as fuzi, rougui, renshen. Those are his signature. If you see those three herbs, maybe 70% chance that formula came from him, because that would not be his signature. And if you add another thing on top of that, if you add Shu Dipang, then definitely no question it is Zhang Jingyue. So that would be his main focus. So in a way, he's writing about Mingmen is to rebalance the scale, and so we can have a full understanding of what ministerial fire is. So it's not just the pathology, but also the healthy aspect of what's the vital importance of that to us as human beings. So that would be it. And there are a lot. He wrote a lot about ministerial fire. And actually, there are a few essays. Hopefully, we'll do it sometime in the future. Now, it really talks about what's a physical manifestation of the ministerial fire. Where does it come? What's a mechanism for it? The mechanism for it to function in the body, and also what it is like in pathology. How do you treat it? Things like that. But let me just touch on a few things that I found very important from his Mingmen theory. So the first one is basically we definitely want to talk about the balance of yin and yang from Zhu Danxi to him. And the second aspect is this is actually, I think it's a very valid critique of him on Zhu Danxi. He says, okay, Zhu Danxi, you say you are like this enriching or nourishing guy. But he says, you're not really enriching in. So, but I need to explain this from historical context again, because so when we talk about nourishing in today, we think of Liu Di Hong Wan, we think of Zuo Hui Yin, Zuo Hui Wan, things like that, something to nourish the king yin for us. But from Zhang Jingyue's time, that was not the case. So from Zhang Jingyue's time, when you talk about nourish in, it actually means tonified blood. So, because if you actually look into Zhu Danxi's writing from his own pen, so he wrote two books while he was alive. Another 2-3 books were published after his death. So the book where he discussed all the disease and treatment was a book called Jin Gui Gouxuan. So it's called Exploration of the Depths of the Golden Cabinet. So in that book, basically that would be the blueprint of the later work called Danxi Xinfa, the Heart Teaching of Zhu Danxi. That's a work published 150 years after his death. And that would be the most influential work for his school of thought, but he did not touch that work. So in this earlier work, Jin Gui Gouxuan, wherever he says nourish in, he uses Si Wu Tang. He did not use Liu Di Hong Wan or Zhi Bai Di Hong Wan. He would use Si Wu Tang. Basically, it's a blood tonic. And also, in case he suspects there might be a ministerial fire or pathogenic fire, he will add Huang Bai Zhimu into it. So that would be his signature. It would be Si Wu Tang plus Zhong Huang Bai, and also he will use a lot of Ershen Tang modification. That would be his signature. So back to Zhang Jingyue's time, he's like, okay, now you're talking about nourishing in, but what I'm seeing is you're not doing it. So Zhang Jingyue his nickname was called Zhang Shudi, So in plain English, it means Mr. Zhang, the 属地黄 guy, or Mr. Zhang, the Romania guy. So he would just put 属地黄 into everything. And one of the crazier formula, well, it doesn't have 属地黄 in it, but you can kind of see the idea. It's called 麻桂饮. So 麻桂饮 has 当归 in it. He says, well, it's a combination of 桂枝汤 plus 麻黄汤 plus 当归 and all this stuff. So whenever you resolve Taiwan disease, yeah, remember in the Shanghai Lun, we say that, okay, after you take the 桂枝汤, you need to take kanji, right? He's like, no, you don't need to take kanji, just use some blood tonic. It's the same thing because blood and sweat comes from the same source. So if you tonify blood, cool, you can use it. Okay, back to the 属地黄 conversation. So you will see that Zhang Jingyue, he really advocates using 属地黄. So sometimes when we think of Zhang Jingyue as this warming and supplementing guy, we say, oh, he only uses 附子肉桂, all that young tonic stuff, that's like hot stuff. But that's not really the case. Wherever he uses those, 属地黄 is usually there. And even his, I would say, the purest young warming formula, I think it's called, I don't remember the name, 四味归阳饮 or something like that. 四味归阳饮. So that one, that one is 四逆汤 plus 人参. So you will always have something there to generate the fluid, the essence, fluid, or some type of in substance to keep the young anchor. That would be his idea. So actually, I think this idea became so influential because right now in Martin Clinic, wherever we treat the people, we cannot escape the conversation and say, should we take care of kidney? Whether you want to do kidney yang or kidney yin, we always have this conversation and say, should we do that? And that will definitely be a footprint of Zhang Jingyue that I think many people fail to realize because a lot of times we think of the clinic as the I don't know, like the battle between yin and yang. You have the fire school people who's like, oh, all you need is yang. And then the yin school people, so everyone just calm down. They just do yin. And then those people are like fighting each other. But then if you look in the story, it's like, wait a second, they all come from one guy. This guy called Zhang Jingyue. And he always take care of kidney. So that left behind a lot of influence into our practice today. So sometimes I talk to some of my colleagues, some friends, especially those who are really herbalists who really like to do long-term care, give a lot of kidney. I say, hey, we really need to talk about Zhang Jingyue, and we really need to talk about things from his teaching, where he got his idea, and how should we use those ideas? How should we apply those ideas into clinic? And what are things that we need to look out for? And actually, we're going to talk about more in the next translation for Zhang Jingyue, because in the next translation, we're going to translate 183 formulas from Zhang Jingyue. And so we have his own description of what the formulas do. And also we have some historical commentaries. Some people really praise his work and say, wow, those things are miraculous. And also we have critics who really hate his work. So for now, we really see a better balance of pictures. So, because Zhang Jingyue, he's such a good writer. He's so persuasive. Whenever, after you read it, I bet you're just going to go to the clinic and just, okay, 属地黄 for everyone. But then Chen Qiu is like, well, if you do that, your stomach and spleen will suffer, you know? So he was like, before you do that, consider stomach and spleen. So in the second work, we're going to talk about more of how do you really do that in a bit. But I would say the core idea will be contained in this first translation. And yeah, I think that's a really good way to for you to think about strategy of what we should do in clinic, especially when we want to touch on the kidney conversation and say, okay, if we're talking about kidney, why? And actually, then this leads to my next thing. Since Zhang Junyuan brought the idea, like, okay, when we talk about yin and yang, when we talk about nourishing yin, we are actually talking about kidney. That's the idea he brought up. And so from that, he actually leads to the second conversation is the difference between the earlier heaven and the later heaven. So today, again, including, we take that for granted. When we say early heaven, of course, it's kidney. So the idea came from Zhang Junyuan. He was the one who says the Mingmen, the kidney yin, kidney yang, original qi, original yang, original yin, original essence, those are considered as the earlier heaven aspects of the human body. And that will be the focus of his treatment. He says, whatever you do, you always need to make sure the person's constitute or the earlier heaven is all right. Whether you are dealing with acute or chronic disease, you always have to look into this aspect. That will be his really great contribution. And personally, I think it's a way he really wants to reconcile with Zhu Danxi, because as much I think he leaves the impression that he hates Zhu Danxi, in some way he wants to preserve Zhu Danxi's his legacy as well, because he can just reject that, Zhu Danxi makes no sense, you don't need to tonify blood, you just need to do it in. But he says, well, Zhu Danxi is partly correct, because what Zhu Danxi mentions, when you need to nourish in, he means blood. So he separates his stuff to the early heaven conversation and leave everyone before him as the postnatal, the later heaven conversation. So that's really fascinating. And actually, I want to bring out one great point of controversy, and that is actually what I discovered from this work. I read it before, but I didn't realize it as much earlier. But then when I worked through this translation, I noticed that. So in the clinic, we always talk about the earlier heaven, later heaven, like conversation. We say, okay, you have the kidney yang, that will bring out the yang qi, and yang qi will bring out the spleen qi, so you can have digestion and bring out all the later aspect. So in the work, Zhang Junyuan would say, if you are really good at engendering qi, generating qi, you work from the essence. So that's the conversation we're talking about. You can use Shen Qi Wan, you can use Zhen Wu Tang, you can use Liu Wei Di Huang Wan, Ba Wei Di Huang Wan, things like that, and Yu Hui Wan, to bring out the kidney yang, and then you'll bring out all the yang qi in the body and get the qi generation moving. So we know that. But he also said another sentence. He says, for those who are good at engendering essence, you work from the qi. So that means we have this concept of our prenatal early heaven resource, almost like a saving account. You can only withdraw from, but you can never make deposit to it. Once you deplete it, it's over. And whereas the later heaven aspect is almost like a checking account, you can deposit and pull out in and out. But his idea is that no, you can work both ways. You can make deposit into the checking account. Checking account can go into the saving account, and this and that. So, and this has been a very controversial point. There are a lot of critics who just say, like Chen Xiuyuan, like Zhang Nan, and He Mengyao, they read about this. Okay, this is nonsense. They just like, no, this doesn't work. But there's another passage. Actually, that's why I brought this conversation. Is that he says something very interesting. He says, we always think of the kidney as the one that stores the essence, right? What is the verb there? Stores. It doesn't engender. He says the essence is generated in all 5 sound organs, or actually most influentially, the spleen and stomach. And after they generate all this essence from all these places, it got stored in the kidney. So that means when we talk about treating the essence, we do not have to focus only on kidney. And so then actually let's bring up the point we just mentioned earlier by Centurion. Centurion say, well, if you just take a lot of kidney tonics, then you'll destroy your middle gel. And so actually, instead of doing that, you should look into your spleen. So they're actually talking about the same thing. So that would be, I would say that's a open conversation for a lot of us to discover later. But I would just say there are just a lot of fascinating things going on inside his Mingmen theory. This is not the only work that contains all his Mingmen writing. There are a few really influential essays we might translate later. We'll get to it one day. But it's just so much. And another discovery which I just noticed recently is because during this COVID pandemic, I was reading through Wenbin Tiaobian finally, because I was a really pro Shanghai guy, so I was avoiding it for the longest time. But during this pandemic, I was like, okay, I need to know all there is about transmission of disease, especially Wenbin, because I don't know enough about it. So then, to my surprise, there was one entire volume or entire chapter dedicated to Zhang Jingyue. It was just quote unquote like straight off copy off from Zhang Jingyue's work, and from there actually I discovered one thing. So this again ties back to the Mingmen theory. So in one chapter of this work where he discusses about Mingmen theory, he breaks up the Mingmen into 3 burners. How the Mingmen shows up in the upper gel, in the middle gel, in the lower gel. And this actually, in my personal opinion, I think he inspired the writing of Wu Jitong of his 3-burner differentiation. And you can trace that route back to Zhang Jingyue. And so again, this Mingmen conversation is just this fascinating, huge topic of discussion. And I was talking to a friend earlier today. I was like, the way we think about this, the Mingmen conversation is almost like a Chongmai conversation of herbalist. Because if you are acupuncturist, when we talk about Chongmai, wow, you see that it goes down to your leg, it goes along with the spine, it goes to the face, the chest, and it goes everywhere. Same thing with Mingmen, it goes everywhere. So, and I would say that this translation will be a really good start for us to look into where our idea in the clinic, where are all these concepts coming from? And so we can enrich our practice, so we just don't jump in conversation. This must be in, this must be out. And so we have a more open conversation about all this stuff and how do we discuss the treatment. And so I think those would be a good start. And certainly I want to rush on the next volume as soon as possible so people can bring this idea into clinic. Because for me, even though the talks of theories and concept is very important, yet I think the most important part is still our practice, how to apply it. Because I would say a theory is always a hypothesis until you put into practice and verify it. And I think that's one of the great gifts, or one of the many great gifts he left us to this day. And I'm just happy to be a part of the process to bring it into English. And
I think you're going to change a lot of people's conceptions of what Mingmen is, because I think most people have the idea of the acupuncture point when you talk about Mingmen, and it doesn't go beyond that. And through these writings, it's very much related to things like ministerial fire and all of this, and it being located in like the life force of the body and all of this kind of thing. So it's quite a conceptual jump. So I'm glad these works are coming into English.
Yeah, yeah. I'm just so happy to be a process of it. And I was talking to my my herb teacher earlier today, and actually, because the book has been out and there has been some feedback, some response, and I was like, seriously, I had no idea. I had no expectation at all. I was like, I did this translation part of it because Zhang Jingyue really inspired me when I was a young novice, when I just got into learning Chinese medicine, and his work really offered this clarity, cuts through a lot of ambiguity, and offer us a really robust framework to look into what Chinese medicine has to offer. So for me, one of my sentiments is that I must do this translation for the sake of preserving this guy's voice. So I never expected this book to sell more than 100 copies or the 50 copies. I was just like, okay, if it's out, I'm happy. And I was just like, please don't lose too much money, otherwise Johan will get mad at me. And then we will not just say anything anymore. But then I heard the response. I thought, wow.
Oh, that's fantastic. I'm glad to hear it's been going well.